All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today we have a very special guest, my first boss in the Amazon game, the one and only Brian Johnson.
How's it going, Sean? It's really good to
Hey,
see you again.
yeah, it's great to see you too, man. So I think just for everybody else who doesn't know you, which was probably going to be a very small portion of the audience, but Brian Johnson is the founder of DeepM AI. He's been in the Amazon game for a very long time. He's got an absolute wealth of knowledge. And part of why I'm so excited to have him on is he has started this company called DeepM, DeepM.ai, which is a data-driven, AI-centric organic ranking company. Now, Brian didn't tell me to say any of that stuff. That's just my impression. But yeah, Brian, first of all, thanks for being on the show.
I appreciate you having me on. Glad to be one of the early adopters, I guess, of the show too.
Yeah, yeah, you're very early on. And I think I want to dive right into it because I think you have so many interesting things to say.
Let's go for it.
So, generally speaking, I like to kind of start just at the beginning and asking, like, you know, can you tell me a little bit about your specialty or the things that you're truly excellent at? And I think, especially when we're talking about this in the context of DeepM, like, I think there's a lot of organic ranking stuff that you can bring to the table that just nobody else I could even possibly talk to could talk about. So I'd love to hear about your specialty and maybe kind of go from there.
Yeah, kind of looking back, over the last 10, 11 years in the Amazon space, I had a journey from seller to always been a seller, but never been a primary role as a seller, just kind of secondary partnerships, that kind of stuff. So I do continue to sell, but I started out in the PPC game, first PPC software on the market, hundreds have come out since then, of course. PPC course agency shifted over to conversion rate optimization because that seemed to be, the next thing that really needs to be dialed in, not just, PPC, which was largely getting automated, by then. And then when I finally switched back over 2 years ago, it was more of a focus on like, okay, we really need to dial in this organic rank and everybody's doing it wrong, in my opinion. That's obviously my opinion. And of course, what I saw was I had always speculated that there was a lot more data that could be observed and could be interpreted given the right amount of, the correct rules and algorithms and everything. And of course, machine learning came along and AI came along. And this is before like the chat GPT and the language models came out, of course. But we had built, my partner and I out of Israel built a model that could reverse engineer how A9 ranks products on Amazon. And we got really good at it and really, refined it down to the point where we originally were making, we would take a couple thousand data point observations and we would blend it, many times through our deep learning model and end up with, probably 3 to 5 million data observations that we could make. And that help us reverse engineer how A9 treats an individual product category, a specific product niche, I should say. Most people would probably consider it like, say, a subcategory, but it's whatever your product is, who your target audience is, whatever search terms you're going after, that's your product niche. And you may not be competing against products exactly like yours. You may be competing against products who are very much unlike yours, yet you're still going after the same audience for the same search terms. So ultimately, that's who you're competing against. Yeah, so that was kind of how we transitioned into this, and we've increased the magnitude of it quite a bit. So we've gotten more data, more accuracy, and it just continues to get more refined over time.
I want to drill in because I'm sure I'm not the only person who will have this question. But like, how did you realize that everyone was doing it wrong? Was there something that happened that sort of clicked for you, or like, how'd you come there?
The market, the community has its tells, and they're pretty easy. If you start listening for them, you can see like, wait, they don't know. And I remember I used to echo the same kind of sentiment also. And, there's certain things that I have said in the past that I'm like, going, I said that. I was one of those people out there who said that, right? But it meant absolutely nothing. It was crap. So it's things like you need to run ads to rank. Okay. You need to optimize your listing. You need to focus in on, better main image, like all of these kind of generic comments. It's like, well, yeah, duh. But that's not specific enough in order to really help me here because I'm getting crushed by some other factor, by some other competitor, and I don't know why. I don't know why my product just jumped, 10 positions higher today from yesterday, and why a week later it dropped back down again and even got worse. I couldn't answer questions like that. It's kind of like, what? It could have been something happened, it's like, oh, these sellers, or maybe somebody did a media mention, or somebody's doing black hat. It was all just like speculation. And I certainly had my own list of speculation, but I realized I'm like, well, you know what? I'm tired of never having the answer. I was always the guy back in the day. It's like people would seek me out because I would find the answer. And I was right back in the case now where I was in organic ranking and going like, I can't answer the question for my own brands, let alone anybody else. And so I started building tools and partnered up with a guy who's just absolutely brilliant when it comes to machine learning and modeling and way smarter than me, and really getting in and figuring out, it's like, okay, if we have enough data, that means we need to collect more data than anybody else does except for Amazon. And we need to be able to, a way to process all that data so we can look for the patterns. And yeah, so that was kind of our pivot point of, okay, let's turn this frustration into an actual solution based off of what we speculate is the answer.
I mean, that is a very, very data-driven approach. Some people say they take a data-driven approach. I think that is a true data-driven approach.
Well, and I was always a proponent of, it's like, oh, you've got to have the human side of the team. And that is true, but it's split into two parts. And since I was focused specifically on organic ranking, there's a lot of different, what we call search rank factors that contribute to influencing how A9 ranks a product for a search term. I can rank any product for any search term that's related, that's non-branded. I know that because I've got the data to be able to tell me how it can be done, whether it's cost effective or feasible to do that, from a financial standpoint, that is always going to come into play. But I know why a product ranks number one, and I can tell exactly why all your top 20, 30 competitors, exactly what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, that you can exploit those weaknesses and you can out-optimize those that are stronger than you and really make a difference as far as the ability to rank. That's the data-driven approach. But what it does not solve for is it doesn't solve for the human factor. You still got to have that piece because you still have to use the product listing, the images, the videos, the text, everything, the feedback ratings, all these other things that we can measure from a data standpoint. But ultimately, how does your consumer, how does your target audience perceive that? And does that help them to, first of all, do you get their attention in the first place? Second, do you get them engaged so they click through to your product listing? And third, are they then convinced in order to add to cart and ultimately to check out? And that's a whole sequence of the funnel that you have to blend game A9 all you want by brute force data, which is what we're doing. But you also need to pair that with the subtle optimization of, I need to speak to my audience. I need to understand who my audience is, what their desires are. And frankly, at DeepM, we're not dealing with that. That's a future roadmap as we expand out to other marketplaces, other channels, because this is a multi-channel e-commerce solution eventually, which is cool. Because then we can do things like we can track like, oh, your audience actually, the reason your sales went down is because your traffic went down on Amazon because it all shifted over to TikTok. We see that on a regular basis now. But being able to measure that and know, where is my audience right now and what are they how are they finding those products? You got to know that to figure it out. But it is a blend. We don't handle, image creation, or copywriting to make sure that we're enticing the shopper. But we will brute force data the heck out of that thing to know exactly how to beat your competitors for organic ranking. That's specifically what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, you brought up, I mean, I feel like I could go 100 different ways with what you just said.
It begs a lot of questions.
Yeah, I want to talk about the search rank factors. So can you and I would love to know generally, because I know it probably depends on each niche. I know this because Brian actually presented DeepM to Mastermind I'm in. So I know that it depends per niche. But could you talk to us about how the different search rank factors impact organic ranking more generally?
Absolutely. So we are now at the point where we have, like I mentioned before, it's like, we observe a couple thousand data points to look at, 3 to 5 million observations. And that came up with, 20 to 30 search rank factors, different elements about a product listing and its promotion and its sales velocity that seem to influence A9 more. And we're now at the point where we consume tens of thousands of data points. That turns into 30, 40 million observations, not feasible to do by any human team. And now we're up over 100 search rank factors. But ultimately, we still need to boil this down to what's actually going to move the needle here. Where do I need to focus my attention? I'm not going to focus on all 100. What we didn't originally realize when we started this research, and we found later on, is A9 treats each product niche differently in the way that it considers or values things like content SEO or content optimization. A title optimization may be extremely important. It may have as much as a 30-35% impact. We have like all the statistical data as far as the ranges and the impact and all this kind of stuff, of course, but and it varies from one product niche to another. And there's some common players, and I'll bring up what those are as far as the common ones that we see. But an example on that is you may have something like the title optimization, what words that you have in there. And we go so far as we're looking at everything. We didn't know it at the time, but we were building for Cosmo and didn't even realize it. But we were just trying to do better than everything else, was available. And so we look at standard content optimization. Take a title, for instance. It's got, you're now limited to 200 characters. You can't repeat words more than twice, that kind of stuff. And so it then becomes more important is if you're going after specific search terms and search phrases or combinations of search phrases, then what is in your title versus the other wording that you've got to mix in there in order to attract and to differentiate yourself, right? But you still, in order to play the algorithm and the search, you're putting in words and phrases in different sequences, in different positions within the title. Certain words are in front, in a different sequence, of each other. Some are farther away from each other. Some of them are spot on. Here is the top search term. Others are semantic exchange words where it's call it a synonym, and maybe you've got synonyms that mean the same thing, but you call it something different. It might be, somebody may say, oh, that's retro. It's like, no, that's nostalgic. It's like, well, those are basically the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And with different connotations to the person, right? And so there's a lot of SEO that goes into every content field on a product listing. Title typically comes up as probably the biggest influence. Limited real estate, a lot more competition. There's a lot more precision when it comes to, well, does this word belong in the title at all? Does it actually have conversion value when it comes to organic ranking? Does it need to be in position 1? Does it need to be position 7? Does it need to be in position 7 behind specifically this other word that needs to be in position 6? It's that kind of stuff where we're getting into precision. We don't need to be that precise, but we built it to always be ahead of the curve when it comes to that. Okay. So title, as an example, is a search rank factor that has many nuances within it, right? And so you can't just say like, yes, I have a title. Okay, cool. That doesn't help. It's specifically how did you structure your title for those search terms, and how, more importantly, is because we're looking at the entire niche, we know what everybody else is doing for every content field, for every rating, for every PPC, wherever, whatever sales velocity that they're doing. And so we always measure that against what the competition is doing. Because what that points out is it points out the strengths and the weaknesses. We think that Amazon's been around for so long that everybody's already out optimized, and the only thing you can do is price and maybe gaming the system, doing, giveaways or, some kind of, expensive PPC or a big discount in a coupon or price, whatever the case is, and that's not true. It's more of a case of there's so many players going after so many search terms that not everybody gets it right. And what they, more importantly, is they don't understand what search rank factors matter the most to A9. We usually boil it down to about 10 to 12 of the most important ones. Usually it's something where it's like, it's got to have at least 2 or 3% impact on A9 or higher for us to include it in our initial audit. But from there, we can see where one product niche, title is the number one thing, has the biggest impact. Maybe it's got a 30-35% impact. We go to some other product niche and title may be 15%, 12%, much lower. But maybe in that other category be price has an 8% impact, when most categories price has less than a 1% impact on A9 directly. And there's important nuance in that, because there's a difference between convincing the consumer on price versus convincing the A9 algorithm with price. And those two are different. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where it's, there's some subtle nuance there, of course. But things like, title optimization, bullet point optimization is probably number 2 quite often. Category alignment, as far as whether or not you are in a product category that your product is assigned to a category that is most relevant to the search terms you're actually converting on. And most people don't understand the science behind search term to node matching. Colin Raja actually does a pretty good job of talking about some of the indicating factors, which he calls like GL and DAO for like general ledger. And that's kind of his method of matching up fields in different parts of a product listing. Are they all in alignment? That's not the same as what I'm talking about as far as search term to node matching based off of what A9 prefers. But that's part of, one of the things that we have to measure is what does A9 actually prefer in this product niche? And I'm actually converting on those search terms that matter for the subcategory that my product is in. And if I shift over and I start converting on terms that are not related to my specific subcategory, my node, Amazon will automatically move my product. Or Amazon will show me listed with a bestseller rating in 2 or 3 subcategories. Well, why does that happen? Well, it's because of the search terms that you're actually converting on. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's so much, there's a lot of academic research that I've done over the years in this space. I don't consider myself an academic, but I do geek out pretty heavily when it comes to the data science on Amazon.
That I know to be true. And you don't have to answer this question, but I'm wondering, how are you measuring like the percentage factor? Like, is there anything you can share there?
Oh, sure. Well, so I mean, I obviously can't reveal anything as far as our algorithm because we're actually working on a patent for the actual algorithm that we use in the back end. But as far as the general data that we are collecting, imagine this. So this is just a starting point. Okay, here's my products. I'm in this particular product niche, and I have this is my product or my product family or my whole product catalog. Maybe I'm all in the same product niche. And let's say there are 500 search terms that seem to matter to shoppers and to the conversion in this space. We'll go out and we will look at, and typically like a search results will, the most common thing is to go, you can go multiple pages deep, but typically like the top 300 is typically, let's say, what keyword tracking tools might look at. A lot of, if you look at something like a Helium 10 and you say, oh, well, I just use Cerebro and that tells me how I'm competing against my competitors. You go in and you pick what other 9 competitors. So just 9. Right? So all page 1 probably. And it tells you what's the overlap. Cool. If you're already on page 9 and you're trying to figure out who's ranked better for search terms and who's getting more, volume, that kind of stuff. Cool. That's enough. That's a good early way of approaching it. If I want to track that over time, you might use something like a data dive, in order to craft a better title, with a blend of search terms that are based off of keyword research search volume. And then I can use Rank Radar in order to track it over time visually, and it looks nice. Again, and then that's probably more the intermediate level. But then if you're at a level of competition where you need more precision rank optimization, that's where you need a lot more data. So to answer your question is, we'll take top 500 search terms and we'll crawl that 300 products deep on every single search term, and we'll look at every single product and every element, every title, A plus, what are they doing for, where is every single word within each content related to the search terms, so that we can judge how every single product in that niche is strong or weak, how relevant they are, how focused they are on a specific theme for the search terms that you're going after. Ultimately, we cram all that down, we analyze it 100 different ways, and we observe, why is this one ranked in position 1 and this other one is position 9? What was it that made it different? What combination of all of these other things that we observe across 500 search terms multiplied times 300 products. Yes, they're overlapped, but they're different search terms. And they've got different, configurations as far as their product listing and pricing and review count and all this kind of stuff and whatnot. And we'll figure out what is the pattern that A9 is using here in this particular product niche that influences how much, which search rank factors and by how much that each of these elements influence A9 specifically for ranking, since that's our focus. So then we can take that back and we not only say, on our initial pass is, okay, here's the A9 profile for your product niche. But on a weekly basis, now we're going to measure every single week. We're going to go back and scan your top 20, 30 competitors on the search terms that you're intentionally going after. That's not 500 search terms. That's probably more like 30 to 50 at most, right? And so some of those are going to be ones we recommend that you didn't even realize, like, oh, I could actually rank number one for this, and it has this much value when I get there. Cool, let's go after that one. Just based off of, we observe, hey, you got strengths here that your competitors have, consistent weakness. You can pass 80% of your competitors, by doing these certain optimizations. And so, yeah, the more data you have, the more power you have. Now you've got a lot of tools who are starting to integrate, who just discover it's like Amazon just included in the API search query performance. Cool. We've been doing that for 2 years. Like, where you been?
Yeah.
And not to knock that, we saw the same thing back with PPC Scope back in the day. Is we did everything where you were importing reports and files and that kind of stuff. And when the API came out, all of a sudden there was 40 new solutions that came out. Cool. We get leapfrogged. Understand that. But just pulling in search query performance is not going to get you there. It's a cool feature. You definitely need to be looking at search query performance. It's got some very great value. You're scratching the surface. There's so much more that needs to be really evaluated. And that's kind of where I didn't want to come in and say I wanted to be a little bit better. That's usually not how I come in. I usually come in, it's like, I want to be like the SpaceX against NASA. So it's like, you guys are way outdated. This whole industry needs to be rebuilt. Now, that's a little lofty dream for me to say that in my space. At the same time, I want this to be like, this is a full, like, multi-channel e-commerce solution is where we're going with this. This is not like, hey, cool, here's a new Amazon tool. No, sorry. This is if you really want to blow it up, you really want to dominate market share, that's the game we're in now. We have to be.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon continues to become more and more of a winner takes all market. And honestly, when I look at it, it's just more of the same. The top guys are selling even more product. They're making even more profits than before. Like, I'm working with someone and like they're having record breaking months, month after month after month right now, while everyone else is worried about tariffs and stuff like that.
It's awesome.
And I think,
Love it.
yeah, but it's because Amazon's a winner take all market. And once you figure out, like, look, that's the way that you're going to win is by dominating and really capturing a lot of market share. Once you figure that out, you're playing a different game than everybody else. Listening to you talk, I'm like, man, like, this is so exciting what you've been building.
The only way
I had
I
a
can
couple.
accomplish this, like, I can dream. My dream continues to get bigger and bigger as far as this thing goes. It just is running unchecked at this point. But I had to surround myself with people who were a lot more smarter than me, could execute on the software and the data science. And so all of the revenue that we currently take in this first 2 years goes into hiring like data science and data engineers and machine learning experts and this kind of stuff. It's like, I haven't gotten paid for 2 years, but it's because we're doubled down on the core, the core functionality.
Yeah. I had a question. You didn't talk about one thing that really stood out to me because it's been very true in our experience, but maybe this doesn't matter to the A9 algorithm as much, or maybe it's more of a given and it's more of something that's factored in. But how does conversion rate fit into this whole mix?
It's huge.
Because traditionally, I'm more of like a midwit on the dumb side of the equation, where I'm like, if conversion is better than competition, scale PPC and win. But I think what I want to know is, like, how do you think about conversion rate and how does that factor in?
It's a contributing factor. There's no magic bullet. As much as we wanted to believe that it's like, oh, all you need to do is just sell more units than the next guy and then you'll win. But yeah, if it was only that easy. Conversion rate is very important to me. In fact, I usually tell people if you don't have access, especially if you are a startup brand or an early brand with few products, you can't be hiring agencies and software, competitive intelligence, companies like ours, or, software and that kind of stuff. You just don't have the resources to be able to do that. So what would you do? So in that case I would absolutely, assuming you've got brand analytics, go into your search query performance report, pull every search query performance report for the last year, for the last 4 quarters. If you have however much data you've got, go back, 4 quarters if you got it, for each ASIN. So you got brand level, you got ASIN level. And then for every search term, that you are converting on inside of Search Career Performance. And this is what a lot of the tools that now have access to the API are coming forward and saying, yeah, we do things that nobody else can do. It's like, no, you're just pulling in data that's always been there. Is go in and you can calculate the conversion rate of your product for that search term relative to your competitive set. So that what they say, like in Search Career Performance, people will look at this as far as like your ASIN self would be my own product, right? And I will look at the number of purchases that I've gotten on ASIN self, my own product, divided by the number of clicks for ASIN self, my own product. That's going to give me my conversion rate, my organic search specifically. It's not PPC. It's not all the other organic non-search. This is just for organic search. Probably makes up, 40% of the total sales on Amazon. And you can look at that as a great indicator. You can say purchase of my own ASIN against divided by the clicks. That's going to give you your conversion rate. And then you deduct the conversion rate that you calculate on everything else, which is what they call total. So in Search Career Performance, it would be total purchases divided by total clicks, and that'll give you essentially your benchmark competitor. In other words, your average competitor, which is usually like maybe your top 20 or 30 competitors on those search terms.
Mm-hmm.
It'll give you that conversion rate. And what I usually tell people is if you have a positive number there, take your conversion rate minus the competitive set conversion rate. If you have a positive number, lean into it harder. If you have a negative number, that's probably going to translate to being too expensive when it comes to ads also. Now, your ad conversion rate is going to be different than your organic search conversion rate, which is going to be different than your, call it your tacos conversion rate, your unit session percentage. But ultimately, you can compare all three of those to see where they're in alignment and where they're out of alignment. And what you're looking for is, where do I seem to be out of alignment, or where do I seem to have a significant disadvantage? And those two tells will say, look, people want your product for this search term, lean into those search terms. It may not be the hero search term that has the highest search volume, but you need to carve out your own space, make your own revenue, and actually double, triple, 10x your sales as is without expecting to take on the number one 800-pound gorilla in your category. Like, don't be a fool and say like, oh, I can take on Superman. It's like, yeah, you're dead. You're going to be pissing in the wind there. You might as well, go after what actually resonates, where you can carve out your own corner. And this is not saying long tail, because there's some short tail 2-3 word terms that you can have where this works. It doesn't have to be a long tail. That was one of those other statements like, oh yeah, no, always optimize for long tail. It's like, yeah, that's kind of generic advice, right? And then we're done with generic advice. But yes, conversion rate is the first thing. Secondarily, once you focus on all that, then you can start picking apart what's the delta, what's the difference in click-through rate compared. Because then you start seeing where the conversion rate is, what's wrong with my product relative to my competition at a minimum. Click-through rate is more like, how come I'm not attracting shoppers? Like, why am I screwing up my listing? Search Career Performance will give you that data too, because a lot of times you'll go in and you'll see like, okay, my average price is this price here, and the average competitive set, average competitor price is same as mine, twice as much as mine, half as much as mine. Those can have a massive difference, a massive effect on your conversion rate and your click-through rate.
Interesting. So I guess if we were to talk about click-through rate for a second, do you guys analyze click-through rate factors? And could you talk about that? I mean, again, we're not trying to take anything proprietary. It's just like, this is going to be fascinating to
I'm not worried about.
I'm not.
This is something that's kind of a difference of opinion. You get a lot of software solutions who simply just take the data that Amazon gives them and regurgitates it. Maybe they put it into nice, pretty charts. Maybe they say, well, this is what this means. Cool. But if you don't actually pair all of the data together, figure out what the patterns are, where they match up, where there's an outlier, where there's inconsistencies and consistencies, you're not really going to find the true competitive advantage. So I'm not really concerned about revealing individual metrics, because that's not where the secret sauce is, so to speak. It is, it's doing it all at the same time, when it comes to things like click-through rate, we look at relative click-through rate. Relative conversion rate absolutely has a bigger impact on a brand's ability to rank higher. So we can take a brand that has, we can take a product that is ranked for a search term in position 40, let's say, and we can get them up to, just through brute force optimization, we can get them up to position 10. But when you start, it gets dramatically more difficult the closer you creep to number one position.
Impressive.
Fun fact on number one position, we've had a number of clients who've gotten to number one position because that's what they said they wanted. And then their competition started showing their colors and started attacking them. They started having problems and their accounts got suspended and all this kind of, like, hey, this never happened before. So then they would come back and say, like, can we back off to position 3? Yeah, of course you can. Like, I understand you want to be in position number 1, but there's consequences to being at the front of the line. And so they oftentimes are like, well, let's back off to position 2 or 3. And the funnier part about that is I'll bring that up to somebody who's just joining, and they're like, yeah, that's cool. Let's see if we can get number 1 first.
Yeah.
Like, I understand, like, sure.
Yeah.
But where was I going with this? Click-through rate. Conversion rate, we definitely know is going to have the biggest translation as far as profitability on ads, for instance. So if you're working with an ad manager, or you have it in-house, regardless, is you really want to make sure that your products naturally convert better than your competitors for individual search terms, and then lean hard on those search terms. The thing that a lot of ad managers don't do, and this is the space that I came from, so I'm familiar with it, that you came from as well, is that they look at what's gotten popular in the community is like, oh, I'm looking at, exchange ACOS and ROAS, depends on, whatever side of the camp you're on, doesn't really matter. They go from ACOS, where it's ad spend relative to ad sales, and they jump all the way up to TACOS, where it's like ad spend relative to all sales. Well, there's 3 forms of sales. You've got sponsored sales, you've got organic search sales, and you've got organic not search sales. That'd be things as far as, product detail pages and category and brand, stores and all that kind of stuff.
Like the organic modules that show up on the bottom of other.
That are not tied to a search term. And so you get where PPC is probably pulling, 40, 50%, and you get another, 30, 40% on organic search, and then you probably get another 10 to 20% on everything else, right? And they're jumping from ACOS all the way up to everything, and they're missing the whole piece in the middle. That's why we came up with ACO SaaS, which we one of our clients actually, they called it taco sauce, and that just kind of stuck with us. So we call it taco sauce, and that's bridging the gap by saying, okay, there's actually data in the middle that you need to be aware of, because if you're running ads and you're only looking at ACOS and you're adjusting your bids based on ACOS or ROAS, you're doing it wrong. Flat out, you're doing it wrong. You're only interested in how you look to your client based off the ads that you manage, not based off their success. And you get a lot of people say, oh yeah, we help them rank, and we help them, we keep their tacos low and all that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, but you don't know how that's happening, because you're only controlling the ads, and you think that the way that you're controlling the ads is improving your tacos, and it's not, because you got no idea what the secondary benefit is, because you're not even looking at the numbers. You're not looking at things like search query performance. You're not tracking the rank. You're not tracking the relative strength and weakness and positions on every single search term for every single product across the entire niche to know what's my relative position among my competitors, and how do I utilize all that information to take over market share and dominate prior to my peak season, so that I just own everybody. Which is kind of the dream, but everybody's like, well, this agency tells me that they know how to do it. Yeah, it's good marketing. But, ask any service provider, any agency, like, cool, are you tracking the organic rank of my products on those search terms, those keywords that you're going after? Are you tracking the organic sales that are produced as a result of the increased spend on ads? If they're not, move on.
So it's funny, for our agency, we kept trying to buy a solution that could do basically what you're talking about. And we got so fed up that I literally built something myself.
Yeah.
Like, it's because it got so frustrating to look at like all these numbers on 4 different screens. Like I wouldn't be able to explain it to anyone, because I would be like, okay, so here's your conversion rate, right? And like, yeah. And I'm like, here's your organic rank. And I have to switch screens. And they'd be like, why are we what are you even trying to tell me? And I'd be like, okay, but now we got to talk about your competitor's conversion rate compared to your conversion rate compared to the organic rank. And I'm like jumping 3 screens just to try to have a conversation about how we're trying to grow their organic sales. And they're just like, what are you even doing? So we straight up built a solution. We got an API connection, and then we just like started building a solution because this became completely unmanageable as we started to grow and as we started to rank more products. So like what you're saying is resonating so much with me right now because
I was hoping
it
that was
was
the case.
yeah, it was such a problem for so until we literally built a solution. And I can't code. Like ChatGPT is my number one employee. I just
You know what? Honestly, I mean that's because I do a lot of queries against our database, and I hadn't coded in 15 years, and so I got in there and it's like well, I can get 80% of this correct. Like it works fantastic as far as that.
yeah. Well, look, as we start to get towards the end of this interview, one thing we always like to ask is if you have any hot takes or truth bombs, especially when it comes to, for you, ranking. Because, like, do you have anything where, yeah, I'm very interested in any hot takes you have.
I mean, I would probably say that the thing that surprised us that most brands still don't know is that A9 treats each product niche, each subcategory differently. And it is definitely helpful to know where to focus your attention if you know what is important to A9. Unfortunately, the only way you're going to do that is through brute force data collection and analysis. But it is something to consider, maybe ask yourself is, you know what, we keep on doing this coupon and it never moves the needle when it comes to organic rank. Well, maybe that particular niche doesn't value short-term promotions like coupons like you think it does. Just because all your competitors are doing it doesn't mean it works. From a ranking standpoint, maybe it is. There's some that we can paint a journey of. Well, you can do. You can spend the next 4 months building up momentum in unit velocity through PPC, and that can be very expensive. You're not going to do it if you're in pet supplements, guarantee you.
Mm-hmm.
But you could turn around and use a legitimate like search find buy giveaway service,
Mm-hmm.
and you could spike that in the first 2 weeks as long as you've already optimized for all the search rank factors for your subcategory, because otherwise you won't stick the landing. You'll just go up and you'll start falling right back down again if you didn't optimize, because you don't belong. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not because that's kind of like a common saying is like, oh yeah, I know if you jump up to paid, top 5 through some promotion, through strong promotion, your conversion rate will take over and you'll just magically stick there. How often does that work?
Does not.
Maybe 10% of the time,
Yeah.
because they're not optimizing full against their competitors, so they don't belong. But you combine those two, there
Mm.
you go. So that's kind of a hack, I should say, combined with the truth bomb of something we didn't even know. It surprised us. There's several things that we learned that surprised us, that went counter to what we speculated it was going to be. But you look at enough data, and you can't just say like, oh, data is king, because data always has to be blended with consumer behavior and appeal and design and these kinds of things. But I tell you what, without the data, you're in the dark. You're just flat out, you're blind.
Wow. Look, I want to thank you for being so generous with your answers. This has been such a fascinating conversation. Honestly, I would encourage anyone who's listening to this and interested in the stuff Brian does. I assure you, I can vouch he's the real deal. So, Brian, why don't you tell the audience where they can find you?
I mean, I probably live on LinkedIn the most, Brian R. Johnson. You can also reach out to us at deepm.ai. That's another good place. That's our site.
Yeah. Well, Brian, this was awesome. Thank you so much. And everyone else, until next time.
Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.